All right, everyone, welcome to the 1st November, Wednesday's Ambient Weekly Contributors Meeting. We have Mitch talking about, all right, take us away.
Thanks, Francis. Mentioned last week and sort of demoed a little bit of the Argo reference architecture that I'm presenting at Istio Day next week. I would like to be able to promote this into some sort of Istio repository. The plan is to follow Istio Day with blog posts as well as documentation on how we recommend users upgrade Ambient. So this is sort of just the first swing at it. The README would largely grow into a set of docs. And I wanted input. Is anyone concerned about this being merged upstream into a repository there? I know that in the past we had a reference architecture that we built in collaboration with the Weaveworks Flux team and Flagger. And one critique we got was that a lot of users couldn't find it. It's under Stefan Prodden's personal GitHub. He's he's like the chief architect or something like that at Weaveworks. So I'd like to try to avoid that with this particular architecture by getting it anchored somewhere that is easily discoverable and that communicates that this is coming from the Istio project. It's not just someone out there's idea of how to upgrade Ambient. My thought is it would be maintained by the UX working group or what's left of it. Yeah. Any questions or concerns?
No, I mean, I think that's good as long as there's a disclaimer about the maintenance state, Mitch.
Yep. I couldn't find any way to make blinky text in Markdown, but
Did you put it in all caps?
I did, the disclaimer there. I'm hopeful that that's enough to catch anyone's attention before they get far in the process. Keith?
Yeah, this looks fine with the caveats that Louis mentioned that you've got there in the disclaimer. I think that as far as order of upstreaming, I think it would be, and you've got it there in the README, but I would love to see the tag chart. If it is what I think it is, I would love to see that kind of made first class in the Istio repo, and maybe get some formal docs out for that as a parallel effort, because I think that's really needed right now.
I have Sam Nasser working on that as we speak. It missed the train for 120. So that's the reason that it's not currently in the upstream, but I think we can expect it by 121.
Fantastic.
And if you look at the chart as I've got it, it's stupid simple. As we discussed back in the spring, it still is backed by mutating webhooks, even though Ambient doesn't need mutating webhooks. But defining the API in Helm means that we can ad hoc change the in-cluster representation of a tag to be a config map or a CRD or something else potentially, and not disrupt the actual customer interface, which is Helm or IstioCuddle, as the case may be. Oh, Greg's got his hand up. What's up, Greg?
Yeah, I guess as one of the UX maintainers, because I know Xiaopeng probably isn't on the call right now because of the time zone difference, but any sort of handoff or, I don't know, learning dump that needs to be performed?
That's a great question. For one, I'm also a UX maintainer, so I'm not just passing this off and washing my hands of it. I expect to be actively involved in the maintenance of this thing moving forward. The talk on Monday, we have a lot of context that's needed, and that'll be, of course, recorded and put out on YouTube. Aside from what's mentioned in the talk, which really is covered very thoroughly, I hope, in the README, I tried to put a lot of information in there. It's not as shiny as my slide deck, but it should communicate about the same information. Apart from that information, I guess we could talk a little bit as the UX group about what we need to do each Istio release to keep this up to date. Like, do we want it to follow and in 6 months it'll be running Istio 121? Or do we want it to just be frozen at 118 and 119 and the principles carry over from one version to the next? Obviously, one is more work than the other, although neither is much work. The whole point of this is that upgrades are pretty trivial.
I mean, I think we would like it to at least upgrade until we hit the GA state, Mitch.
I think that makes sense. And actually, that at one point there, within the tag chart, I've got this ugly thing that I'm calling a Z-tunnel shim. In 118 and 119, which is what I'm basing my demo off of, the Z-tunnel didn't respect revisions. So there was no way to control which control plane it was pointing to. And it actually always pointed to the Istio-D service. So if you're using revisions and there is no Istio-D service, the Z-tunnel couldn't find the control plane. So I've got a little Istio-D service in the tags chart that is just a shim for the Z-tunnel. Once we get to 120, that is no longer necessary. The fix has merged for that. So there are a lot of things that we'll gradually clean up as we get closer and closer to GA, the tag chart being one of those. Excuse me. Yes, phone room 6FS.
Oh, I thought I checked in. Sorry. Yeah, this is cool. Nice. Can we do this like 10x and more than just ambient and Argo? I feel like in Istio we kind of give people the building blocks and then say good luck, and it's quite a bit of work.
This was so much more work than I expected.
To be fair, I would say if you look at Kubernetes, like a lot of that is somewhat similar because go build your giant, massive, scalable thing is like just go use GKE. But there's probably a bit more reference around how to correctly architect a cluster in that space. So I could see a lot of things like obviously this just without ambient, this with Flux, or maybe we want to talk about like multi-tier CA setup, multi-cluster, multi-network, like all that type of stuff. That's kind of architectural references. I could see a lot. Obviously, that's a ton of work. I'm not saying that you should do that, but it would be pretty cool if this was like the first in a step towards adding a lot more of those. Somehow. Now,
we have one for Flux, John, and I can share that with you. It's just not merged into Istio, so it's sort of dangling out there. And to be honest, I haven't looked at it in a while, so I don't know what its state is. But the big problem with doing this for sidecars is because they don't support declarative upgrades, it's very difficult to integrate with GitOps.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but at the same time, like we have users on sidecars, right? So all these thousands of users are doing something. Some of them are probably doing good things and some doing terrible things, and we should probably help guide them towards doing whatever the best they can do is, right?
Yeah, I'll show you what we've got for sidecars. For the particular architecture I did there, I moved the sidecar definition out of injection and actually put it in the deployment spec, which allows you to have declarative upgrades. If you go into that and move Istio to the next version, all of the sidecar specs in the deployments get moved to the new version, which is kind of cool. It also is kind of clunky and clutters your deployment spec quite a lot. So there's kind of disadvantages there. Carl Stoney, actually at AutoTrader, has built an operator that is constantly checking what version of the data plane you're running. And if it mismatches your control plane, it nukes your pod or evicts or whatever. Very similar to kind of what we did at Google a couple of years ago. So there are options, and we could actually get a blog post about different ways to manage the sidecar until you're able to get to ambient, but none of them are beautiful. I see a bunch of hands, but I don't know who's up next.
Yes, I think you're up next.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, +1 to everything that was just discussed. I think the way to do this is because as John mentioned, to replicate this would be a lot of work, and kudos and appreciate Mitch kind of taking the first step here. But I think if we really want to replicate this, and I very, very strongly think that we should, and give users more guidance for something as complex as Istio. I think the best way to go about doing that is to bring the users into the community, like highlight them, ask to increase that feedback loop and see how are you deploying Istio, what patterns have worked extremely well for you. We vet those. And I know there's a survey that's going up for KubeCon, and I think if we have people willing to have us follow up with them, I think that's something that we can ask about. Lots of companies, they want their engineers to be able to contribute to open source and have that. It looks nice to say that we contributed the reference architecture for Istio. We're technologically advanced. For a lot of people that works. I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that, John. But in general, yeah, I think that Istio as a whole could stand to see a lot more fresher faces. Not that I don't love all of y'all. Y'all are awesome. But I think any healthy project, we want to see lots of people coming in from external to the community, to be completely blunt, coming in external to basically having contributions from people who aren't paid to work on Istio. And I think that this is a really great gateway, no pun intended, to increase the number of people that we see in that role.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that sounds great, Keith.
Yeah, great idea, Keith. So this is super cool for sure. So just to make sure I understand, because I missed last week's meeting, you are proposing not only to upstream to Istio ecosystem, you're proposing to upstream to Istio as well. Is that right, Mitch?
I had in mind the Istio org rather than the ecosystem org, but that's up for conversation. We could discuss that. It's a little bit more difficult to manage code owners in the Istio ecosystem. We would be kind of on our own to set up code owners for this. Whereas if we merge it into Istio, we can simply say the UX group is code owners, and that all gets plumbed through pretty easily. John says samples under Istio. Istio could be another place. So that my preference would be Istio, but again, if there's concerns with that, we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I guess for me, I think I share some of the John's sentiment around, what about other stuff around in the ecosystem. So for me, this might be jump into, too fast, because I don't think I spent time to review your repo in close detail yet. So the first thing I would ask would be, what's the upgrade guideline? Is this the upgrade guideline we're going to produce for our user? Or what about Helm and Istio Cuddle? We are also doing in parallel, right, for Ambient. So this is like, okay, we're adding another way to install. So what is the project's guideline if it's merging into Istio? I think we need to be clear on that. Second, I think a lot of users coming from Argo background, they are thinking about their application running in Ambient, their application rolling out a newer version with Ambient, right? Which is I don't think that's the scenario you are targeting right now, but we want to make sure we don't confuse those users who are doing rolling out a newer version of their application, either leverage Ambient or leverage your traditional sidecar, which I think Argo works great with those scenarios too. So it almost feels like it would be nice to see how we plan to architect this information before we decided where to land this content, because there is a bunch of surrounding contents around this, so we can make it clear to our user what is the recommendation level for this reference architecture with Argo.
Yeah, great points, Lynn. As far as Helm and Istio Cuddle go, this is built on Helm. So this is not an alternate path to upgrading Istio. This is showing you how to upgrade Istio using Helm and Argo. So I'm not building a third path that we have to maintain or anything like that. That would be really scary.
Okay. So do you think maybe it makes sense to be in the install section around under Helm, maybe like a step one under Helm, so it's clear this is leveraging existing Helm support, was introduced a new way?
Yes, I would recommend putting this in the operations docs. When we merge it into the docs repo, it should be under the operations section. This is not so much focused on install. Technically, you can install with this and onboard, but what we've heard from our users is that's not the hard part. Getting Istio into your cluster, even in sidecar mode, isn't so bad. What's difficult is knowing how to continuously operate it and have it production ready at all times, patch CVEs, move to new minor versions, and that's the focus. In particular, if you scroll down in the README a little bit, there's a section where we call out roles. And there we make clear that like the app dev, who's responsible for things like how do I roll out a new version of my application, is really not the persona we're focusing on here. The app dev is the customer of this platform or the user of this platform. Instead, the persona we're targeting is that second role, the platform engineer. They're responsible for operating Istio in production. And so that's the persona, for the most part, that we're optimizing this repo for. We do have a sample app in the repo under the application folder. It's book info. I just kind of copied it over. And I made a couple of tweaks to make sure that we had enough gateways to demonstrate the gateway upgrade process and that sort of thing. But by and large, the purpose of this is not to advise application developers how to use Istio, but to advise platform engineers how to operate it.
No, can I have my install using Helm, and then I find out lifecycle is pretty hard to manage and use this to take over my install? Just thinking loud here. Like, can I, have this integration after my install is done, or I have to do it, plan it ahead?
No, you can, as long as you kept your Helm values file. Like if you lost your Helm values file, it's true of Helm, it's true of Argo, it's true of really anything you use. There's no easy way to reproduce exactly what your installation parameters were. And so migrating
I think Helm can, you can get that value from Helm get values or something, Helm get whatever.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Helm stores it in a secret.
Okay, yes. So if you used Helm install, if you used Helm template, which a lot of
used Helm template, you're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, thanks.
Sanjeev? Sanjeev, you're muted if you're speaking right now. I'm not sure. Or maybe that was an accidental hand raise.
That was muted. Thank you. Yeah, great job. This is a great article. I'll look through it. You mentioned about putting it under operations. Right now, as you might know, all of ambient documentation is under operations. So there's some amount of restructuring needed of the whole set of ambient documents. And also, as I mentioned earlier, for a category of guides that we're calling user guides, we're creating a subfolder in there, and various kinds of user journeys are being put in there. So,
well, that could be a great place for it. I know that the user guides, or the user guide document right now is completely empty. This is work in progress.
Yeah, we're filling in a couple of there and more to come. And this could be another example. But also the fact that all of ambient is under operations right now.
Okay, I'm going to go check out those PRs. That sounds really interesting. Austin, what's up?
Mitch, my concern, I think we discussed last time as well, but I want to make sure that we are going to make the change or whatever. Any global components like CNI and zTunnel, we need to make sure they are decoupled from the rest. I mean, yes. Control plane, gateways. I mean, no global components. And as I said in the comment, you can have 20 different install methods at the same time if they use different revisions, because by definition revisions don't have any common file because Helm will not allow it. So I just want to make sure we keep a clear separation line between the CNI zTunnel on one side and everything else.
Yep, both CNI and zTunnel are controlled by their own applications in the Istio folder. And then we've got some diagrams showing.
Maybe if I remove it completely, I mean, let's focus on everything else, and let the problem of CNI and zTunnel install and upgrade to a different project, different repo, different whatever. Maybe vendors can take care of it, because again, it's very likely that it's so sensitive that it will be either bundled with a node, or be bundled with a CNI, or be subsumed by the CNI, I don't know what will happen, but it's clearly not something that Argo is capable, or if it should be able to do properly. Better to do it right than.
Yeah, I understand your concern. However, we can't just punt and say we don't know how to upgrade those things.
We can punt. We can say that, hey, this tool is perfect for upgrading ECUD and gateways and other stuff, and there will be a different tool that will deal with because there will be, they're specialized. The specialized tool to deal with CNI and doing proper. Argo is not intended to do node upgrade.
Right.
Or
So
upgrade JKE.
I would welcome any other way of doing CNI and Z-tunnel. I would be very hesitant to remove them from this until there is another way. It's not possible to demo upgrading a gateway today without also upgrading the Z-tunnel. There are compatibility issues. They do not work together across multiple versions. So if we're going to be able to say that Ambient is upgradable in any sense of the word, Z-tunnel and CNI must be upgradable.
But that's a completely different problem that we absolutely need to solve. Stability of the protocol and stability of the, and that again, that's another argument to not put it there, because hopefully it will serve as a forcing function. I mean, it's better, it's okay to have some changes, but it's completely unacceptable because, we understand that Z-tunnel and CNI cannot really be upgraded and kept in sync with the rest. And if they are not compatible, if you cannot have 2 or 3 versions Delta, is not operable. I mean, it's not something that we can hide or pretend that it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
So it still points to removing them, either as a function or because it's not really.
Costin, if we were to remove them and you were to use this repo and follow its instructions to upgrade your gateways, all of your traffic would stop flowing across the mesh. Nothing would be going anywhere. Layer 4 stops functioning. So we can't remove them.
So if we install CNI and Z-tunnel with the official current Helm charts and claim it's a platform problem to upgrade CNI and API server, CNI node, operating system, and anything that is on the node. How it will impact the rest? I mean, assuming we fix whatever bugs are related with compatibility.
Oh, once we fix the compatibility bug, I think we should have a real conversation about where, and also we should have a conversation about what technologies are good for helping our users upgrade CNI and Z-tunnel, or are they just on their own? But until that
platform vendor, I mean, again, we are not telling them how to upgrade Cilium.
Yeah.
So let's leave platform vendors or whatever to deal with upgrading CNI and Z-tunnel, and we have a different project. I mean, I'm saying let's not combine it, because we had this part of putting everything in a spaghetti, and some of them work. Some, beginning of Istio with when we had Citadel and all the other components, we can be modular. Anyway, that's my opinion.
I see.
Hold on though. Hold on. That's kind of a nutty argument though, in reality, because Cilium doesn't claim that you can't upgrade it, right? Like, I think I understand where you're coming from, Costin, and we absolutely need to be careful. Like, that makes 100% sense to me. But we also can't, as an open source project, tell everyone that the only way to upgrade their software is to either use a platform that supports it or pay a vendor to do it. Like, I 100%, but and if that's not what you're saying, fine, but that sounded like what you were saying. So I think that, Mitch, especially, I think having your tutorial here, like, if we call out that this is not a perfect way to manage the lifecycle of the CNI and the Z-tunnel, I think that's great. But blocking, real use cases here and usability of this for the argument that it's not perfect, I think is actually just holding us back. And saying, oh, we will figure this out later, it's not happening, and it can't just be the vendor's responsibility. So there needs to be a middle ground.
So first of all, I didn't say that, and nobody should say it, because obviously it doesn't make sense. What I said is that everything if we remove the CNI and Z tunnel, we can say it's perfectly fine for production. If you are a production user, use Argo, it works perfectly. We are confident that you'll have no outages, everything, it's a safe upgrade. That's good. A separate repository can be made for safe upgrade of CNI and Z tunnel. You know, there are ways today already. I mean, we are saying it's not possible to upgrade. Of course, it is possible to upgrade it. If you are in production, you can train and you can upgrade properly CNI and Z tunnel. What I'm saying is there is no need to have a spaghetti that combines things that Argo is not meant to do. Argo is not upgrading API server, is not upgrading some system components, and we have no reason. If we put it there and if we keep it there, then the disclaimer should be don't use it in production, because we know that with this mechanism, I'm pretty sure we can reproduce and we can show how you have security bugs, you have lots of traffic, you have all kinds of things when CNI and Titan are in the process of getting restarted. So it's a difference between it's a demo which should never be used in production because you lose traffic or you have TVs, or it's something that is solid and we can productionize and it's safe to use, with another thing that is also safe in production, but it's using a different technology, not Argo. That's really what I'm saying. Not that platform is the only way to upgrade it. It's probably the best way, but user can still do it with some tools. Maybe ECO Cattle is the best way to upgrade because then you can do the training and automate the steps necessary. But at least we should not say it's production ready if it's not. That's because we have done it many times.
Costin, I don't know if you joined late. There's an all caps disclaimer at the top of this repo that says that it is not in any way, shape, or form production ready. Not the Z tunnel, not CNI, not the waypoint, not the control plane. None of this is production ready yet.
But it should be. I mean, there is a path to make it production ready. I mean, upgrading the HOD, upgrading the gateways, upgrading the rest. That's it's not ready because it's brand new, but it has a path to quickly become production ready. And it's not. There is nothing really not production ready except those two components, which we can independently make with a proper tool, not Argo. Because again, that's a problem with Argo. It's not meant to upgrade to drain nodes.
Yeah, so we should, before we call any of this production ready, we should have a real path for CNI and Z tunnel. I don't know what that looks like. I think you're right that it's probably not Argo, but I don't know what it is.
So why don't you use that basically?
We have that alternate path. I think this is the place to keep it.
I disagree. I think we create an illusion, just like we created with a lot of other tools, that and we don't have any benefit. There is absolutely no benefit for anyone to assume or to get the impression that Argo is meant to upgrade Z tunnel or CNI. It's just misleading. And okay, anyway.
Yeah, Lynn, what's up?
Okay, so I want to chime in quickly on what Greg concerned early on about the maintenance effort related to this. If this is going to be on the user experience work group, right? There's very limited maintainers. I started to think about, what are the functions we need to drive Ambient to beta, right? So if you recall, on our drive Ambient to beta document, the integration with Argo was not there, right? So if we have limited resources within the community on user experience, I'd rather them focus on like Istio Cattle analyze, some of the basic function, basic troubleshooting without Argo. So to that point, I think I'm more leaning towards having this in an ecosystem repo for now, before we think if it's appropriate for upstream and find out, what's the right home for this thing upstream. I think that would be my vote.
So Lynn, I would separate the ideas of what is required for beta from where this should live. Ambient can move to beta and this can stay in alpha. It's got the disclaimer up at the front. There are no real releases for it to mark as GA. So I would totally agree with you that I don't want to distract the UX maintainers from working on that list of things that need to move to Ambient or in order to get Ambient to beta. But I don't think that is the same as where this is stored. Does that make sense?
Longer term, I agree, but short term, if if we submit PR and it's going to have bug fix, drive, review effort from the community. I mean, we still have a bandwidth issue with Sanjeev's document, right, which is top priority to get the user guide in. I think that's like high priority as a community to focus on the beta deliveries. That's why I'm not saying permanent ecosystem is the right home. I just feel right now, given what's going on with the efforts towards beta, I feel ecosystem is the right home for now.
Okay. Keith?
I mean, I would disagree slightly as far as ecosystem. I think ideally, yes, we would want that to be a good place for it. But I think that the signal is, I think if we're wanting to publish something about reference architecture, then that's going to be better received if it's in the Istio organization. I understand some of the concerns when it comes to like maintenance effort. But I think that I don't know. I think there are other solutions there. I mean, we could potentially put this in its own repo under Istio, start our reference architecture repo if we really wanted to. We could put it in samples. I don't think, other than doc test, I don't think anybody really argues about there's debate around the maintainability of our samples repo or our samples folder. So I don't know. I think that if we want to adopt this as a reference architecture, and if we want this to be a step forward towards doing this more frequently, then I think it's actually somewhat necessary for maintainers to feel the pain of needing people to own this. Because ultimately, if we don't feel the pain, we're never going to appropriately staff it from within the community.
I tend to agree with Keith. Also, we do have a discovery problem with an ecosystem. Right? We don't have to conflate it being in a repo with everything in the repos under the Istio org being at the same level. We can find ways to organize this and make this clear to users and help them with their discovery problems. Maybe if we, as Keith said, we could have one reference architectures repo, right, under which there's one for Ambient Argo, right, as a directory instead of being its own repo, right? All of that is fine. People do want these things. And certainly having something, even if it's not claimed to get any level of support other than this is a reference, it seems fine. We don't have to claim that they're GA things or that they're not going to change. I understand, Costin, your concern about setting a precedent, right? But I don't think we can get stuck on that when we're talking about support for things that are themselves alpha right now.
Mitch, what is specific to Ambient in this whole Argo thing? I mean, what would not work with if I use sidecars? Why is it Ambient?
So this really operating Istio upgrades from Argo or Flux or any sort of GitOps platform requires declarative upgrades. So if you go and change the tags in this particular repo, automatically all of your envoys that are referencing those tags will get updated to the versions you intended. That's a declarative upgrade. If you go into a sidecar cluster that's using tags and you upgrade those tags, nothing happens to all of your running pods. Slowly, as those pods restart, they will eventually migrate. You might say it's eventually declarative, with eventually on the scale of 100 days, but you have essentially a completely uncontrolled upgrade process. It could happen when a node restarts or when the app happens to upgrade. It's not declarative.
But if you are an Argo user, presumably your apps are also using Argo and you have declarative control over your pods. My question is control plane plus gateways, which seems to be common. And by definition, if you're an Argo users, you don't actually want this one to restart your pods. You want Argo to restart your pods whenever, because Argo has declarative control over your workloads and You're doing
Argo
weekly pull.
does not. Argo does not support in its GitOps functionality a pod restart.
But rollout. I mean, you can roll out new version. You can do.
Sure, you can. I mean, actually, the way that kubectl rollout restart works under the hood, it touches an arbitrary label and changes a number on it.
Exactly.
That can be done with Argo, but again, it's completely order dependent. So if you push those two changes at the same time and the rollout restart happens before the tag change happens, you've got some pods on one version, on the other. It's not declared.
I'm talking about a reasonable user who's doing what is best practices, which is weekly releases using Argo, doing. So it's not. I'm not talking about corner cases or if you properly use this repository and you have Argo for everything, weekly releases for everything, and it's actually better this way because again you upgrade the labels, you have new version of Istio, and then you gradually and pod and workload by workload you can control when it's upgraded. So you have far more rollback and capabilities.
Yeah. So I would not be in favor of documenting a probabilistic way of upgrading Istio. You change this, and within a week, probably your applications all have the new sidecar. Hopefully,
why probably if you have Argo and you have weekly
because your releases are not determined to be weekly because you're using Argo. You can have a release once a quarter or once a year running Argo.
Sure, but it's still deterministic. I mean, it's exactly as you want it. You control exactly what version you use for each revision. Anyway, my point is, I mean, this small disagreement aside, everything else would apply for both of them. So I don't know if we want to say Argo is not usable for upgrading Istio and gateway, Istio and gateways, or how it relates. If you have both sidecars and ambient, what are you going to do? Use this one to upgrade half of Istio and Istio and gateways, and use something else to upgrade Istio for regular. Sorry about this.
Yeah, I would love to expand this to how to transition from sidecar-based Istio onto ambient Istio, but since we don't know what that transition will look like yet, and it does not yet work, I really can't document that for users. But I think it's a great idea. Keith?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth noting that these are still reference architectures. And so in my mind, we want users to toss in architectures for integration with potentially multiple different things, telemetry with this thing or that thing, depending on how widespread it is. Network cert manager things, different cert use cases, multi-cluster reference architectures. And so I think the bar, I think there should be a bar. I think the bar should exist. But in my mind, my opinion, that bar is, does this work functionally and safely and reliably for users to be able to reference? And if Argo updates, for example, and it no longer works, then we hope users will tell that to us, or if we happen to know, then we can update it, right? I don't know. I wouldn't put this on par with Istio.io documentation, for example. I think it's bar wise as far as what we want to push out there. I think it's slightly beneath that as far as what it is that we're saying is supporting. And so I also don't think it needs to be exhaustive. So even if this starts with just ambient, that doesn't exclude something for sidecar and Argo compatibility later. So again, I think that the diversity of potential integrations with things, as well as the ability to iterate on these things, is something to keep in mind here. Yes, it's ambient today, but you can add sidecars later if/when we think that it makes sense, or if maybe this even pushes us as maintainers to figure out a way to make sidecar upgrades more declarative. And maybe that just stays ambient. Who knows? But I just to reiterate, like I don't see an issue with this right now.
Thanks, Keith. Oh, and thanks to Jackie's recommendation for emojis. If you refresh the README right now, you'll see we now have boom emojis around the disclaimer to draw attention to it.
So I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that it is not allowed or possible to have a cluster where you have both ambient and Istio Classic at the same time? Or what we don't support? I mean, I saw that sidecars can interoperate with, it's like you have...
That's at development level support, Costin, not at alpha.
I mean, you can have Threat Manager and Citadel and Istio.
No, like I know people can do it, but like there's what we say that we support and test, right? And that's the same as what Mitch is saying he's supported and tested, right? Like we can't ask him to support and test things like way beyond like a reasonable scope, right? He has to scope it too. I think the scope that he chose is reasonable, which is ambient only, right, in the cluster, right, which he has in his disclaimer.
By support, it means ambient supports ambient and only ambient talking with ambient and upgrade, and then
at alpha level.
Yeah, sure, at alpha level, and Istio is supported at whatever GA level.
No, he's not saying that. He's saying this is only for ambient, right? So it's not.
I understand that. I'm saying that Istio is a GA product that you can deploy in a cluster.
Oh, sure, but then don't use this thing at all.
Yeah.
So we are saying that you should not use it if you also have Istio.
Yes.
Not, okay, that's something that we should disclaim.
Yeah, that can go in the disclaimer.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to add that.
I mean, do we want to say not using this for sidecar though? People can still use manual injection. Is that right? Or
it's just like, how much do you want to take on? Like he could say it.
Yeah, but I feel like it's important to say what's working, what's not working, because people might already be using this today. Why wouldn't we want to say?
I think as we noted, it's probably important to put a disclaimer. If you have an existing cluster using Istio with sidecars, don't use this.
Yeah, I think too, what I should probably do is just link to Istio.io docs on what the support status is of all of this stuff. Rather than duplicating that information, maybe just a little bit, like in bullet form. But by and large, I want them to refer back to our docs that will remind them, like, hey, today, and even once we get to beta, there will be no support for running this with sidecars together in the same mesh. We want to get there. It's important. It should work. It doesn't yet, or at least it's not well tested yet. And so we're not going to tell you that it's supported.
We'll reevaluate at the next release, right? So if it is in the beta, then obviously there'll be some pressure to update this reference architecture to make sure it kind of sort of works with it, right? And you'd have to document the limitations.
Yes.
But for the moment, I think it's okay to disclaim at the alpha state.
Yeah, that's fair. Sorry, I was trying to say we don't want to say this doesn't work if you're only running sidecar without ambient, because there may be users already doing that today.
But it doesn't work. Right, if you're running sidecars, don't use this thing at all. That's what it should say.
This thing being the reference
architecture. Right? The reference architecture.
But but
you can use Argo.
Yeah,
but
you can use Argo. That's the confusion. I don't want people to think, Istio doesn't support sidecar with Argo, right?
Like, please,
yeah.
Everybody here, don't conflate Mitch's reference architecture with the general purpose use of Argo.
So we are saying that ambient, if you have ambient, you cannot use Istio on the same mate in any other cluster, in the same cluster. And what is the scope of this? You should never mix them up. And why? Because
right now we're saying ambient like support is single cluster only for alpha.
And exclusive, right? only ambient
and exclusive, right? Yes.
Okay.
That's what we said, right? I mean, Keith, Lynn, you guys are the keepers of the status doc. Is that incorrect?
I mean, I don't know. I think Sanjeev, you might already create some talk on sidecar, how it's interrupted from what I reviewed the last time.
It may work, right? But are we saying it's alpha, beta?
We just say ambient is alpha. We didn't say like the interrupt. I don't recall we
not talking about interrupt. Sorry, this is not interrupt. This is simply coexistence. I mean, ambient.
Right, coexist.
No, by definition, ambient should not break application. If I run an application with linker D, it should keep working. If I run an application with whatever I'm doing in my application is my business. If I happen to run an Istio.d, my own Istio.d in our namespace, it should not be broken by ambient. I mean, that's a fundamental requirement for ambient to not interfere with other applications. including if I happen to put an envoy next to my application and call it a sidecar and configure it with something else, it should not break it. So I think it's a bit dangerous to say that Ambient doesn't break any application except if you install your Istio, then it will explode. Because it's
where do we guarantee that though? That I don't think that's a nice property to have, especially when Ambient gets GA. But alpha software fundamentally cannot make that guarantee.
Okay, but what guarantees we make? What does Ambient do? It only breaks history and no other guarantee. I mean, it's supposed to encrypt traffic and do its own stuff.
Yes, but it's also got bugs, Custon, and they may break arbitrary things. And there are things that we know are broken. That's allowed in Alpha.
Okay.
Couple of quick notes here. One is, yes, as Lynn was saying, we are documenting the fact that at least the way the user guides are shaping up right now, they do talk about mixed clusters and even interoperability. Of course, we will add all the regular caveats about what's supported and what's experimental. But the other thing is, I have one data point, which is that at least one person's feedback to me was, even if they don't interoperate Ambient with sidecars, it would greatly help to have them be in the same mesh under the same control plane. So you can have a set of Ambient namespaces and a set of sidecar namespaces. Then they don't talk to each other, but they're in the same Istio mesh.
So with the coexistence use case.
Yeah, that's Costin's point. I personally haven't seen any where we break, but there's so many builds and releases.
So Mitch, just because we didn't ask, does their reference implementation work with coexistence?
I have never tested any portion of Ambient with sidecars, whether by hand with Istio Cuddle or Helm or in this Argo architecture.
Okay. So
it does work when I tried it. And then
but he didn't test it with this.
Not with Argo. Yeah.
I'll say that
not with the reference
revision based.
Yeah.
This architecture is completely revision based, and it uses the default revision. So at least in theory, if you are using sidecars in a completely different revision of Istio, I think there should be no control plane interaction between those two installations. Now, there could be data plane interaction. They'll use the same CA, and I don't know if that causes any problems. Again, I think in the Istio project, we've done a great job of saying, if it's not tested, it doesn't work. Not that it might not possibly work, but that we're not going to tell users it works. We're not going to document it or promote it until it's tested. And as far as I am aware, interoperability between sidecars and Ambient is completely untested.
I don't think it's untested, but that's not the same thing as coexistence, Mitch.
Right. So as far as I know, that also is untested.
Actually, I think we might have some integration test the coexist, not coexist, the interop. I remember.
Yeah, there are some
Ian, yeah.
So at least up until recently, there was no real concept of coexistence in Istio. If you had multiple installations of Istio-D in a cluster, they attempted to be a part of one mesh. And installing different meshes within one cluster where they have different CA roots of trust was not.
We're not talking about that though, Mitch. Right? We're talking about a non-ideal GA state where if you have the same root of trust, sidecars and Ambient, the sidecar things can talk to the other sidecar things and they'll work. If the sidecar things try to talk to the Ambient things, we don't know if they work, and vice versa. Right? So it's not what we want the GA state to be, clearly. Right. And it's not two meshes either. Right. And Sanjeev was just pointing out that that might be useful to help some people test.
I see.
That's what we mean by coexistence.
I think we should test it. We should get some integration tests spun up for that if that could be useful for our users.
Well, it sounds like there are some.
I think Lynn was saying they were interop tests.
Yes, for interop, I've seen it. I think Ian, you even enable some of the tests recently, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So we know it. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I unskipped maybe a couple, and then I think Steven is working with maybe an intern on.
Somebody from
further
Microsoft.
unscripting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jeremy Morris.
Yeah,
from my
Jeremy.
team has been
Okay.
working with Stephen on unskipping some tests.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy and Ian. Yeah, so definitely we know interrupt works to some capacity. Coexist, I don't think we tested it because there hasn't been much thoughts around it. So we could potentially add a test for that too.
So
Although if interop works, it's probably working, right?
Exactly.
no, but it implies you cannot test interop if you don't have both ECOD and
Great
so
point. All right, so coexist worked.
Okay.
Now that's different than your reference architecture, Mitch. So you can
Right,
disclaim,
You can
if-
try it now with your reference architecture. Sorry, Louis, talking over you.
or you could choose not to test it and disclaim it.
For
Right.
this week, I think I would. I'll add it to the disclaimer because we
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
live coming up on Monday, and I don't want to break it.
Right.
Yeah.
And just add a tracking issue, right?
Sounds good.
That sounds perfectly reasonable. We should probably move on.
Louis, you want to talk about Auth-Z policy in 4 minutes?
No, that is not possible. Other than I was supposed to get to the doc. I haven't gotten to the doc as much as I would like, so I don't have a doc to share. Sorry. And now obviously KubeCon rolling up and presentations becoming a little bit more pressing. Don't expect it next week, and you all aren't going to read it next week anyway. So
Yeah, well, and
sorry.
Should we reserve time for the 15th then?
Yes, the 15th sounds reasonable, Francis. Thank you. Always the optimist. But I will try and get together with John this week to iterate on that. And if there's something to send out, I'll send it out.
any other topic should we?
Don't just pin this on me,
discuss?
by the way. John can talk about this when I'm not there. So it's Louis and John.
I don't think John is on. Isn't he dropped
He had
out?
a drop, yeah. He was on for the first time. All right, I guess dress warmly next week. That was Mitch's advice at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, see some of you at KubeCon then.
Yeah. See you Monday.
Yeah. Very nice.
Bye, folks.
Bye, folks.